Okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Good evening and welcome. My name is James Hospitalis, the founder of Earth Medic and Earth Nurse, and we are very happy to be putting on this session this evening jointly with the Global Consortium on Climate and Health Education at Columbia and with University West Indies St. Augustine campus. We've got a stellar lineup this evening. We're focused on climate communication via the media, and I think that everybody will be inspired and edified by tonight's session. Thank you very much. Over to our moderator for the evening, Wesley Gibbings.
Hi, good evening, everybody. And I thought I would start by explaining to people why we're here. And I think though you may have a notion of why you're here, I think if I had to summarize it, I would say it is that we're facing a phenomenon in the Caribbean, and I would say globally, where there is a sort of disconnect in the communication process between the scientists, particularly in this area of the connection between climate change and health crises. I don't use climate change and climate crisis interchangeably. My standard terminology is climate crisis, because I think if we acknowledge it as a crisis, a lot of the outcomes of it would be very readily seen as crises in their own right. So why are we here? We are here because we need, as a Caribbean community, to address this deficit in the information infrastructure. Just a second, let me just get this up. Yep. And it's part of a series. This is the third in a three-part series that deals with practical climate action for Caribbean health professionals, a how-to series. And we've looked at several other issues before, but this evening, we're going to be looking specifically at communication and the media and how they relate to communicating the matter of climate change and accompanying health crises. So what do we expect at the end of all of this? We would hope that at the end of this evening's conversation, participants will be able to describe some of the key roles of media and communication in raising public awareness about climate change as a public health threat. Now, this is something, and before we came online, I was having a discussion with Haley. Those of you who are in the Southern Caribbean can relate immediately, given the severe weather events of the past few days. You can relate very readily to this notion of the connection between these severe weather events and the rise in public health threats and risks. Hopefully, you will be able to understand what is required to effectively communicate climate change information in an engaging and motivating way to diverse audiences, bearing in mind that not everybody is at the same level of comprehension when it comes to the scientific issues in particular. And you also have a lot of other phenomena in the public space, including skepticism, including a sort of growing anti-science approach to how we resolve our problems. And then, very importantly, we're hoping that you participants will be able to identify and utilize various communication channels, because we have to recognize, and we have some fine presentations coming up that will acquaint you with what are some of the requirements of the various mass communication channels to effectively advocate for climate action, leveraging their trusted voice as health professionals. Just you as a health professional, as an advocate, as an activist in your area, to be able to communicate far more effectively. This information is for the CME, Continuing Medical Education Credits, and you probably are aware of that already. And so let me go straight into our presenters. Now we have three professionals who are entering this discussion from various angles, but all sharing the common view that there is a requirement to improve the manner in which we as Caribbean countries have been communicating climate change, the climate crisis, and its association with public health crises. First in line is Faine Richards, and Faine is a communication strategist and development storyteller based in Trinidad and Tobago with extensive experience in television, news production, and strategic communications. She currently serves as a Development Coordination Officer at the United Nations, focusing on advocacy and media relations for sustainable development. Then we have Dizzanne Billy, who is a climate communicator, writer, storyteller, and advocate, also from Trinidad and Tobago, but operating regionally, devoted to amplifying Caribbean voices in the global climate dialogue. She currently serves as Caribbean Regional Director for Climate Tracker. Dizzanne is actually joining us from Baku in Azerbaijan, where she's attending and covering COP29. So she's right in the heart of the action there, and hopefully she'll be able to convey some messages picked up from there. Then we have Lashley, who is founder of the Lashley Foundation. She's a Barbadian youth advocate and former beauty queen, whose advocacy for sustainability, climate, and health literacy began when she was just 16 years old. As a leader in youth advocacy, Ms. Lashley has passionately used her platform to drive awareness of critical health, environmental, and gender-related issues across the Caribbean and beyond. That's enough from me for the time being. I want to hand over now to Faine Richards, and we're going to take them in the order in which they were introduced. We'll have Faine, Dizzanne, and then Ashley. So Faine, over to you.
Thanks so much, Wesley. It's really great to be here. I'm so honored to be part of this very formidable panel, although I do have the unenviable task of kicking things off. So I hope I have mission accomplished by the end of this. And thank you very much to the organizers for giving me this opportunity. I'm really honored to be here also because this conversation intersects very well, as you would have sort of outlined with my professional bio, with my two spheres of experience and operation. Those being the media landscape here in Trinidad and Tobago as a former journalist and a news gathering editor, and now in the last 4 years, a development communications specialist, where climate change and health are the bread and butter issues that we deal with every day because we are the sustainable development voice in that sense at the UN, which is where I hold my substantive post. So I've been given the task today to achieve 3 things with you all. To frame, as Wesley said, the mass communications landscape, as well as how audiences may differ along that continuum of mass media options that are available to you, so that you can target different segments of the public, in part by understanding what each medium requires of you when you want to take your messaging there. Then I'd like to explore how you can leverage the role of the media, in particular the journalist, so that you can fulfill your quest to convey to the public the information they need to be more aware, to make better decisions, and perhaps even, behavior change if that's what you're after. And finally, when you figure out which medium you want to work through, and you figure out which journalists you want to work with, how are you going to make your messaging land, given some of the context that Wesley outlined as he was giving the introduction. So Haley, you can kick me forward to the first slide. So, as a former journalist, I am very hardwired, as I'm sure you are in the medical profession, when you're seeking answers to a patient's, illnesses or scenarios. Why? Why and what? Why should we communicate? And I know I'm preaching to the converted because you're all here with us this evening, but it's always good to see why we are driven to do this and what we achieve when we go through the media to communicate with members of the public. So what we achieve by doing this is very simply and basically public awareness. There's something we feel, we, meaning you, the medical practitioners, that people need to know, and we want people to be reached with that messaging. So we need them to hear it, see it, read it, depending on the medium that you choose. We want to strengthen public trust. We saw that very much in the pandemic, where there was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of lack of clarity, a lot of dissonance in the number of opinions and the number of scenarios that were playing out, and people didn't know where to turn. So to reach people, to ensure that they trust in the information that's being given, it takes voices that are respected as authorities on the issue to reach them and make that connection so that they can trust in what they're being told. Similarly, we want them perhaps to take action, whether during the pandemic it was take a vaccine, whether with climate change and climate crises, it's, to be more vigilant, to make different decisions in their family lives and their personal nutritional choices, given, flooding scenarios or drought scenarios, for farmers to make different decisions, for businesses to make different decisions. We want them to do something different, perhaps what they are already inclined to do. We may also want to hear from them, and some media will allow you that feedback loop that will allow you to figure out, how do I tailor my message to the audience that I really want to reach? What are their concerns when they hear my initial take on it? And how can I keep answering their questions, their concerns, clarifying the uncertainty that they have? We have a very respected role. I'm putting myself in your shoes by saying we as medical practitioners, because you all are the trusted subject matter experts. And so when you speak out and you use your platform for advocacy, people in decision-making authorities, in decision-making roles, they listen. And that can mobilize resources. It can push things up on the top of the priority list, and it can mobilize support for things that perhaps previously were being neglected on many agendas, economic agendas, political agendas, health agendas. There's so much that you can achieve by speaking out, and speaking out consistently through mass media. You want visibility on maybe some of the work that you're doing, some of the efforts you've been channeling into particular areas of health, and health as it relates to climate change and climate crisis. So that also works for you. Yes, there's the common good that you're trying to serve by reaching people with information, but it also reinforces your role as an expert when you're being seen to be an expert who is working in the area and shaping the conversation. We spoke a little bit about trust that is gained when you're helping people to clarify what is true, what is not true, where should they turn, who should they trust. So that verification that role that you have because of your expertise is quite valuable. As part of that advocacy role that you can also play, your voice can help bring more inclusion of people who may be overlooked in this climate and health crisis conversation. And that's particularly for those who are vulnerable. We're talking about women, we're talking about girls, we're talking about the elderly, people who survive on very basic subsistence and may be particularly affected by climate change when it hits the food supply. So when you can draw attention to a group that may be overlooked, that's a very powerful achievement of communicating. And in the same vein as the ability to mobilize resources and support from decision makers for certain priorities, you can also generate public momentum for certain things to become top of the agenda, for certain things to get the resources and the attention that people are becoming more and more aware need to be kicked to the top of people's decision-making agendas in legislatures, in executive branches of government, in public health institutions, in classrooms. Where do we need to turn as a society? You can have the society get behind you. All right, thanks, Haley, for the next one. So I'm going to go to my first objective, where we're going to look at the framework of what mass media is available to you to try and achieve all of those things we just spoke about. There's a very famous saying that dates back to the 1960s in communications theory, which says that the medium is the message. And that phrase was coined because what I want you to take away from this is that you may think that the most important thing is what you want to say. But what you want to say has got to be shaped by the medium through which you're going to say it, because what people receive is not just what you're saying, it's how it's coming at them. So the medium is extremely important in you tailoring how you are going to reach people and how you're shaping your message and in what way that message is going to reach them. So if we look a little deeper into that scenario, we'll look at the traditional forms of media that we still have available to us, although some may not be as viable as they were a few years back because of the rise of the digitally driven forms of media. But nonetheless, in the Caribbean, we tend to be a little bit behind the curve in the way that some things trend downwards, although that's not to say they aren't trending downwards, but they may not be trending downwards as fast as in other jurisdictions. So in hard copy newspapers, or in today's scenario, you have the e-versions or the websites in many of the Caribbean news outlets where you're getting access to articles that are in the printed paper for free or via the paid subscription e-paper. So this is a text and photo only scenario. That means that people can only look to gain understanding only through what they can read. They have the benefit of rereading it in case they didn't understand it the first time that they read it. But one of the cons there is you're working with a journalist who's going to take what you said, what 5 other people said, whatever sources of information they rely on for wider context, and they're going to filter it in a way that they deem fit for what is most relevant, what's going to have the most interest, what's going to have the most impact. So there are pros and cons there, and we'll delve deeper into that shortly. And who you're reaching with newspapers in a Caribbean scenario is really and truly the mature audience. The habit of picking up a newspaper every day is dwindling, and there are people who are very set in their ways who tend to do that, but they're not very young. Businesses tend to pick up newspapers as a matter of course to keep their eye on what's happening. So you find that business owners and managers like to keep an eye on things in the economy, things in the business sector. So you may get that niche audience there. And I want to point out that governments, at least here in Trinidad and Tobago, do still take the newspaper very seriously. They will respond to columnists, they will respond to op-eds, they will respond to editorials in the newspaper. So that is an interesting thing when we think back to what do we want to achieve with communication. We want certain things to hit top of the agenda. The government audience, at least in Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm sure Wesley can speak elsewhere with his wider Caribbean experience, they're still reading the newspaper. Radio, as we were saying before we came in on the meeting, is still a very entrenched medium in the Caribbean. And that may not be so in terms of traditional terrestrial radio in other jurisdictions, for example, in North America, where internet streaming and podcasts may have taken off and sort of superseded that in certain ways. Radio is an audio-only medium, and that seems to go without saying, but that means that people can't rewind to catch what you said once it's gone. If they didn't understand it, then there's no way, unless you're repeating your messaging, for them to grasp what you're trying to get at. There are varying levels of filtration depending on, am I sitting with a host for half an hour and having a free-flowing conversation where they're asking and I'm responding and people can hear me in totality? Or is this a radio newscast where the journalist took 5 minutes of what I said, chopped it down to 30, 45 seconds, and they've shaped the messaging? So it depends on what format you're using on radio, but you may get varying levels of filtration of your message. Who are we reaching when we speak out on radio? Well, really and truly, especially with all the traffic, it's the traveling audience who's most captive. It's people who have on radio stations, maybe in the office or in a business place. People who voluntarily switch on the radio tend to be the mature audience again, because what is a young person going to listen to ads for when they have Spotify, right? Or they can pick up all the songs that are the latest hits by looking through, threads and IG stories and all of the social media platforms where songs are being chosen to go as backdrops to video content. So you have to know who you're reaching when you rely on that particular platform. Next slide, please, Haley. So we're looking now at television / the television product that is live streamed on the web. So this one, you get some text support along with your audio, what you're saying, and some video. And so people are extrapolating information from all 3 of these dynamics when you're speaking on television. That means that they're in a position, depending on if they can rewind the live stream or they have DVR or, a cable mechanism that allows them to rewind, they can rewind to hear what you said on a second take if they want to take that extra step to clarify. But really and truly, most of this is just consumed in passing. It's on the TV for 15 minutes, and unless I'm really motivated as a viewer, it's gone and I'm not going to rewind it. For those of you who may be gun shy about using a visual heavy medium, just to note that this is where you have that body language and delivery that's really going to help carry your message, which won't be the same pressure in newspaper, for example. If you think you articulate yourself better in that medium because you don't have the constraint of also being looked at live by, 1,000 eyes. So that's something to keep in mind. And depending on the program format, there could be heavy levels of filtration. Is this a newscast where I spoke for 15 minutes and they chopped me down to a minute and a half? Or is this a television morning show where we get to speak freely for 15 minutes and I'm heard, I can repeat my message over and over again? Who's watching television newscasts and morning shows in the Caribbean these days? To be honest, it's a lot of the mature audience again, people who are very loyal to particular programs, and that may cross ages and go down a little bit into, millennials like me, if you're really motivated and you're not on Netflix. It is very heavily reliant on people who are sort of traditional TV viewers. So that's not discounting that that audience is not important, but you should make sure you understand who you're reaching through those formats. In digital news, you have a lot wider coverage that you're going to get now in terms of who you're reaching. You get a broader generalist audience because this is going to be cross-pollinated on social media platforms. It's going to be shared on WhatsApp. So the reach just kind of transcends age demographic, for example. And that can carry text, some static images, and maybe even embedded video. So depending on how savvy the digital news outlet is, you can end up getting this sort of multimedia scenario within their news article on their website that does a lot of work for you. It has some of the same traits as television if you end up doing digital video. It'll have some of the same traits as newspaper if it's a text-based piece. And social media, I won't delve too much into because my task here with you is mainstream media, and subsequent presenters will delve more into this. But you do have the universe of, of content creation available to you where you can bypass the media altogether, craft your own audience. So that's a little work to get that audience built and created and come across in the way that you want to directly. There are length durations, which do make it a little difficult to bring complex things across. You're less filtered if you're going to bypass the middleman and just go straight to your audience directly. It's heavily on the visual, heavily reliant on visual, probably heavily reliant on also making it trendy, making it light, making it memorable, making it catchy. That may or may not be your thing. But here you're kind of really going to tap into the younger audience, all the way up through, I would say, young professionals who are scrolling and getting a lot of their information that way. Thanks, Haley, for kicking me forward. So if we kind of look at the pros and cons of all of them, as we said, newspapers, this is where you're going to get a lot of complex information relayed. The user can read it, they can keep it, they can refer it, they can look back at it if they choose to. Newspapers tend to be distributed in high traffic locations. You're talking about parlors on the corner in your community, talking about groceries, pharmacies, in business places to some extent, as we said. There's permanence here, as we noted. It's not flying by the listener or the viewer and they can't interact with the information again. And you're going to reach your mature audience. The downside, maybe newspaper can be a little drab compared to what's available in the wide, wild west of, social media. It may not be in step with limited attention spans because people are just consuming things for 3 seconds and scrolling. So what incentive do we have? How are we being trained and conditioned and socialized to sit with something and read it for a while and really take it in all of its layers? It's difficult to gauge how far your message goes with newspapers in an era where social media analytics can really tell you, this is how much my product got interacted with. This is how many people shared it, how widely it was distributed, how many people liked it, how well it resonated. So there are pros and cons there, which you may want to consider. And as we said, the audience for newspapers is diminishing. Social media, as we contrasted earlier, is a lot more interesting. It's way more shareable. It can even go viral, which is, a real win for someone who's trying to get a message out there. You can monitor its reach. You can monitor people's feedback. There's that feedback loop where people can interact with your content in the comments, and you'll see how people are receiving your messaging. And you have this permanence where it can be shared, dredged up 5 years from now. Remember when Dr. So-and-so said that he was ahead of the curve. So there's a lot that you can gain from that medium. But with the limited attention span, we're not dealing with complex messages here. We have to kind of keep it very tight, very down to exactly the basics of what we want to say, because our audience has a very limited attention span when they're engaging with social media. Very different from watching a TV program, reading a newspaper. We are open-minded to this idea that I have to engage with this for a while to extract anything from it. So you're also competing with a lot of content. It's a very noisy place, social media. So what's going to help you stand out if you choose to engage that way? And of course, you cannot control the algorithm. So what you think may be trendy and be a hit just may not fight up against the noise that way. Thanks, Haley, for kicking me forward. So I'm going to leave behind the idea of the different media and work towards how you're going to leverage. Oh, I forgot my other 2 platforms. Sorry, radio and television. Very quickly, traveling audience in a car, in a maxi, They're going to come in and come out. The drop off is high. They can't rewind. They can't listen back to what you've said. You don't know, depending on, is it high commute time in the morning or the afternoon? Maybe you get a higher volume of people in the middle of the day who's listening. The station may not be a station that does a lot of talk. An urban radio station is more interested in playing music than a talk show program, and talk shows may have fluctuating listenership depending on the time of day. And as we said, you may have some demographic targeting limitations there, but it does work for complex information. You get to repeat your core messages, and you get to explain and delve into depth and nuance because of the conversation style format, if that's available to you. And for television, video really lends itself to cross-pollination on social media. Multimedia news houses are going to take what you say on a morning program on TV and clip it up to put it on social media. So you get extra life out of what you've said on television on a morning or an evening. It can be compelling because even though you're filtered down to a soundbite, sometimes if that soundbite's really good, it hits. And that's really, the baseline of people paying attention to perhaps learn or want to learn more. So you get that potential of impact. Thanks again, Haley, for kicking me forward. So that's a lot of what the medium available to you might offer, depending on what you prefer, what you think works for which audience you want to reach. But what about the people who you have to interact with to access those media, which is the journalist, right? Or the media presenter or the host? Typically, they have roles and responsibilities which are going to work in your favor here. They have a job to present many sides to a story. And in a situation where we have a data deficit in the Caribbean, and I'll come back to that a couple of times before we close, this is a really difficult task for a journalist, and they need to rely heavily on experts more than they have access to data and reports. So you fill a void for them, and they need you. You are the independent expert that they need to try and extrapolate information from, perhaps juxtaposed with other people's takes on the issue to try and arrive at something that seems like a balanced sense of truth. They need you as the independent expert for verification and clarification. And that's the job that they have. And so they need to find the sources of information to clarify things, demystify things, debunk things for their listening, viewing, and reading audiences. They need context and analysis, not just data, figures, and sort of scientific breakdowns and jargons. What does this mean for people? What does it really mean? Break through the clutter for me, and you can help them analyze everything and give it local and national relevance to the audiences that they and you are trying to reach. Sometimes what is being said in theory differs from what's happening in reality, and journalists are responsible for connecting those dots. So if you have someone denying climate change or denying impacts on people's health, on people's livelihoods, on the economy, when they have experts who can tell them otherwise, that's them doing their job in trying to convey the dissonance between maybe what officialdom is telling them and what's happening on the ground. They need to thrive in this space where best practice is something that they are committed to trying to find and highlight and showcase. Because as we know, there's a lot of people who feel that they are experts and they are not experts, and that's a dangerous thing. And they have their own platforms on social media and other media that open their doors to give these people voices. So they need to ensure that best practice is codified somewhere for people to access, and you can play a role in that. Data, that may be patient data. It may be sort of anecdotal data. We're not talking about confidential patient information here, but sort of numbers. I'm seeing an uptick in the number of patients who are coming into my office with respiratory issues in the last few weeks as we're having a very intense dry spell. That's data from your perspective at your practice. And they also need to answer a very important question, which you would be interested in, because this is why you want to speak to the public on climate change. Impact. How is this going to affect me, the average reader, viewer, listener? They have to make those connections, and that's where you can play a key role. So I hope that from this, you get this feeling that media can be your allies because they share very same missions as you in this space where you want to communicate with the public on this climate change and health issue. Clarity and that clarification also cross-cuts with this idea that, as Wesley mentioned, climate change science is still very obtuse and esoteric for a lot of people in the general public. And you can help break it down by focusing on impacts and making this conversation relevant to people who may think, that has nothing to do with me. I'm not seeing it anywhere. It's not affecting my life. When you can make those connections and get away from the sort of mystifying conversation at a lofty level, that really helps people understand what is happening and why it's happening and how it's affecting them. Misinformation and disinformation is something that also ties in well with the journalist's role, because they have to get at truth. They have to demystify, debunk, clarify, and verify. And we all know, whether it's climate or health or both in this case, there's so much disinformation and misinformation that is circling out there because everybody has a platform, and some of them will use it erroneously or misuse it deliberately. So you have an extremely important role in supporting journalists to debunk that, and they can't do that effectively if they don't have the expertise that they can pull on and quote and cite as sources, expertise that they may not be getting from other sectors that may be more hesitant. For example, in public sector, there may be people who are a little cagey about going on the record about health trends that are being experienced right now. But if you are out there saying, I'm seeing this in my practice, I'm seeing this in my jurisdiction, I'm seeing this in my county, then that's something that they can work with. And as we said, that helps in so many other ways with what are we trying to achieve with communication. So on my last slide, I know I've probably pushed my time a little bit, but I'm almost at the end. We can skip past this one, Haley, because I would have touched that a little bit. So when you decide that you want to work with journalists, you decide to build that relationship with them, you understand what they can help you achieve. Now you have to make sure that the message you've crafted is going to land with your audience. So we want to understand that as a Caribbean society, we have a deep storytelling culture. We have a deep oratory culture, and we trust, oral information. That's why so many of our sort of public advisory ads are still done in the Muna. You hear that? We still have that sort of theater and storytelling about the way we receive information we deem credible and the way that we want information conveyed to us. That's not to say we want you to go on a television program and, act out what you're trying to say. The idea is that people relate to other people a little bit more than they connect with hard numbers and difficult scientific theory and difficult medical theory. So that you want to tap into that characterization that I just made about the Caribbean audience and humanize by telling stories about people who you have interacted with, who are experiencing whatever it is that you're trying to raise the alert on or trying to bring to people's attention. And that's as simple as just using an anecdote. I have a patient who was a fisherman in Guayari, and they have been relying on catching bonito, which is a type of fish, for many years. And they were telling me that because of that sargassum washing up every year, they're just not seeing the number of bonito that they used to see. And they've had to change how they fish, what they fish for, and that is now affecting the food supply in that part of Trinidad and Tobago, and of course, countrywide.
You have 20 seconds.
Great.
20 seconds.
Sure. So humanizing what you're saying is going to really help land all the broader scientific or medical or data-driven context. Focus on the bread and butter issues. How is this impacting people's livelihoods? How is it impacting the mother who has to wonder if I should buy a fan for my child's classroom because it's too hot? Tap into those social roles that we all have as business owner, fisherman, mother, father, parent, caregiver. Find ways around the science to connect with your audience. Thanks so much, folks.
Thank you very much for that, Faine. Very comprehensive. I think every single one of those slides, we could actually spend hours on each slide and getting through all those details. Dr. Hospital has raised the question about the use of podcasts. I want you to hold on that, Faine, because we'll come back to you on that. But I know that Dizzanne, who is next, who is with Climate Tracker, they deal in this kind of stuff. Social media is the space that Climate Tracker occupies. So Dizzanne, over to you, and perhaps in the course of your presentation, you can address Dr. Hospitalis' concern about where do podcasts enter the picture? Where are they located?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for having me with you. I just want to confirm that you can hear me, first of all. All right, great. Thank you
Loud
so
and
much.
clear.
So it really is a pleasure to be here this morning. And I say this morning because I am currently 8 hours ahead of my hometown of Trinidad and Tobago right now. And so I'm going to try my best to get all of my thoughts across, although it's 2:36 a.m. right now where I am at COP in Baku. So as you know, as journalists, we are tasked with informing the public, shaping discourse, and holding decision makers accountable. Right. However, it comes across when it comes to reporting complex and interconnected issues like climate change and health, we face very unique challenges. And so that's what I really want to kind of talk to you guys about this morning. Before I get into it, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Climate Tracker, just to shape and frame my discussion and where I'm coming from. And then I want to put you in the shoes of the reporter, of the communicator, of the journalist, just so you can understand what are some of the challenges and what are some of the opportunities that we face in the Caribbean, all right, when it comes to reporting and communicating climate and health. So to tell you a little bit about Climate Tracker, we were founded in 2015. It's an international organization, and what we do is we train and we incentivize journalists from usually under-resourced geographies to shape national climate debates. And right now, we are very prominent in Latin America, in the Caribbean, Africa, and Asia. These are some of the areas that we work in. We're quite new to focusing on the Caribbean. We've been working in the Caribbean for about 3 years now. And here you can see some of our team. It's myself. I have a team from Jamaica, Suriname, and Belize as well. So if you're in the house from any of these countries, hi. So our vision, what we do is we envision a Caribbean where climate change narratives are not just heard, but they're deeply understood, and where the stories that are told are not just about, a hurricane that happened or a flood that happened, but where journalists and communicators are able to specialize and focus on telling the human side of the story, as Faine mentioned. They are able to really get and dive deeply in telling the Caribbean narrative as it is in reality. So how do we do that? We do that through education and training. We also do storytelling for impact. So our journalists tend to help them craft very compelling narratives and tell the essence of what climate change challenges we're facing in the Caribbean, right? By highlighting local initiatives, sharing personal accounts, and revealing the real human side of climate change. We also do advocate for climate justice. So on the Caribbean team of Climate Tracker, what you would notice is that a lot of our programs are all tied back to climate justice because we recognize the disproportionate impact that climate change has on vulnerable communities, indigenous cultures, biodiversity, all of these things that are very important to us here in the Caribbean. So these are just some faces that you can see of some of the journalists that we've worked with. In the past 3 years, we've worked with over 150 journalists. We've published over 420 stories, and we've carried out over 11 different programs across the region in the past 3 years. These are some of the countries that we have touched, and we've worked with journalists in these countries. If you don't see your country on this list, please reach out to me, because it means that we're having challenges reaching the journalists in your country. All right. So we're very proud of some of the work that we've done, and just to show some of it, we do have a recurring energy transition journalism fellowship that we work on. Here you can see some of the stories that our fellows have done across the region, focused on energy transition. We do have a climate justice journalism fellowship that is actually currently in its 4th iteration. and a lot of stories coming out across the region about different angles and different stories related to climate justice, right? It's human rights, about worker rights, food production and food security, women and indigenous communities, and so on. This is just a snapshot of some of the training sessions that we've had online with journalists across the region. Another one that we're really proud of is our Citizen Climate Journalism program, where we engage with citizen journalists, and we also engage with community workers to help them to understand how to communicate climate change. All right, so these are some of the stories that would have come out of that, looking at Guyana and the carbon credit situation there, looking at some solutions-oriented stories as well. Another thing that we do is we do take journalists, young journalists, to COP every year to get that hands-on experience in reporting on COP. So right now here we have 3 journalists reporting here, some of them focusing on health here at COP, and from Puerto Rico, from the Bahamas, and from Guyana. And then we also have some virtual fellows from Trinidad, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Antigua and Barbuda. So these are some of the partners that we've worked with in the past: Canary, the Cropper Foundation, Open Society Foundation, and the European Climate Foundation. Right. So now that you know a little bit more about Climate Tracker and you have a bit of a sense of what we do, I want you to start putting yourself in the shoes of a communicator, of a journalist, so you can understand some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that we face and we engage with. All right, so some of the challenges. So of course, and some of these Faine would have already mentioned, but I'm just gonna go into it a little bit as well. So with regards to the complexity and interconnection of issues, this is the first major challenge for journalists, because reporting on climate change and health in the Caribbean is a very complex, it comes across as a very complex issue in itself, right? Climate change doesn't operate in isolation, it's very multifaceted, and it affects ecosystems, it affects economies, and above all, it affects human health, right? Rising temperatures, oh, sorry. I would say rising temperatures, more frequent and intense hurricanes, sea level rise, and the spread of infectious diseases are just some of the few outcomes tied to climate change. And these impacts are not only environmental, but they have very far-reaching implications for public health. So this is one of the challenges that we face as journalists in the region, just understanding the complexity and interconnection of these issues, right? So that's why it's so important for us as journalists to be able to connect with you as the technical experts to understand these issues in a way that we can then report on it very with confidence, right? And with an understanding that we can then bring it down to the level where the public can understand just how much the climate is impacting their daily lives, right? So for example, water temperatures, right, can exacerbate the spread of vector-borne diseases. Flooding caused by heavy rains can lead to waterborne illnesses and so on. How do we take that complexity and how those things are interconnected to our daily lives and get the public to understand that? All right, so I just want you to keep some of these challenges in mind, so that when you yourself seek to communicate it, or you yourself try to reach out to journalists, you understand where we're coming from, all right, from the journalistic or the media perspective. Another big one, and this is a really big challenge as well, in the Caribbean, and I know Faine mentioned this, and it's something that journalists and media across the region, we all kind of come together in understanding that this is a challenge that we face, and that is the lack of local data and research. This challenge, it really limits the availability of localized data and research on climate change and health in the Caribbean. And while global studies provide valuable insights, yes, but the Caribbean is a region with very unique vulnerabilities, whether it's due to geography, socioeconomic conditions, our health infrastructure, the absence of in-depth region-specific research, it really does make it harder for journalists, for the media, to report accurately and responsibly on these pressing issues, right? So much of the health data in the Caribbean, it's out, well, in some countries, more than others, perhaps, it tends to be outdated and not consistently collected to make it, and that makes it a difficult task for journalists to track the trends over time, right? So moreover, as well, research on intersections between climate and health, it's still emerging. And then we have the amazing work that's being done by organizations like Medic. But we really need that connection to be made between the technical experts, the ones with the stats and the data, to help the journalists craft well-rounded, evidence-based stories that adequately reflect the reality on the ground. All right, so that's a challenge to keep in mind. Another one that we face as well, of course, is political sensitivity and government resistance, right? We know that the government landscape in the Caribbean is quite unique, but it's another very significant challenge that we face. And this surrounds both climate change and public health. In many Caribbean nations, governments are under pressure to balance economic development with environmental health concerns, and at times, political leaders may downplay or deny the urgency of climate issues to avoid international scrutiny, or to protect industries that rely on fossil fuels, or not going to name names, but Trinidad and Tobago, or unsustainable agricultural practices. Right. So in this context, journalists face obstacles when attempting to hold governments accountable or challenge narratives that downplay the reality of climate impacts. Sometimes journalists may fear backlash, right, whether through legal action, defamation suits, public vilification. I know quite a couple of journalists who have faced this because they were trying to tell these stories, and it can be quite intimidating, especially for young journalists, the young journalists that we work with. All right, so that is something to take into consideration as well. Another, and I'm gonna close the challenges here, is the inadequate public awareness, right? So that, of course, is where journalists come in. But while climate change is an existential threat, many Caribbean communities are still grappling with immediate concerns such as poverty, unemployment, crime, and this makes it difficult to capture the attention of the general public on longer-term issues like climate-induced health risk, right? And this lack of awareness can really make it more difficult to engage the public in meaningful conversations about the risks that they face and the actions that need to be taken. All right, so these are just some of the challenges that we face. I'm not going to go into all of it because then we might have like a therapy session here at 3 a.m. in the morning. So I'm going to go straight into the opportunities. All right. Some of the opportunities that in reporting on climate health in the Caribbean, definitely raising awareness, and kind of leads, you have to take the challenges, ride with it, and turn them into opportunities. All right. So there is a big opportunity for raising awareness and advocacy, because while the challenges may be significant, the opportunities for journalists to raise awareness are equally profound. The Caribbean is at the forefront of experiencing the impacts of climate change, as you know, and as journalists. Now remember, I'm telling you to think in your mind, put yourself in the mind of a journalist, right? So I'm referring to all of us right now as journalists. As journalists, we have the opportunity to highlight the immediate and long-term health risks and these phenomena pose, and help bridge the gap between science and general public. All right, so that's a big opportunity for us. And the thing about it in this one is that it's really important for us to do this in a way where it actually drives the message home, right? So that there's stronger public health policies and support from the public. Another opportunity is to collaborate with experts and local communities. And journalists also have an opportunity to foster that collaboration with local and regional experts. And that's why it's so important for journalists to be in the room with you as myself and Faine are right now. And it's really by tapping into the knowledge of these stakeholders that journalists can provide more accurate, more well-rounded coverage that reflects the scientific consensus and the lived experience of people who are most affected, right? So it's only by amplifying those voices of vulnerable communities, whether it's farmers in rural areas that are dealing with drought, whether it's residents of coastal towns facing the threat of rising waters, or healthcare workers on the front line of disease outbreaks. Journalists can create more impactful and human-centered narratives that resonate with readers, viewers, listeners, when there's that connection with the experts and the local communities, right? So another opportunity is definitely leveraging technology and social media. And I saw a question was dropped about podcasts. Podcasts they are now really starting to take off in the Caribbean. It's been around for a while, but it's only, I think, recently, I would say in past 2 years or so, that podcasting is really starting to take off in the Caribbean. And I think it would be really great for you guys to kind of jump on board with that as it starts to take off here. So this, the rise of digital media, it really offers new opportunities for journalists to engage a broader audience. And I know Faine meant, I love how Faine kind of went through different platforms and how each of them apply to different audiences. I love that. Social media platforms, podcasts, interactive websites, they all allow for very innovative ways to present stories that highlight the realities of climate change and its health implication, right? So journalists can think of yourself as a journalist. Journalists can leverage infographics, videos, live streams, and that all helps to bring attention to the climate-related disasters that link to health as well. All right, so that is very important to jump on board with that. There's also the opportunity for education or the educational role in building resilience. And another key opportunity here is that beyond reporting the facts, right, we can educate the public on the steps that individuals and communities can take to protect themselves from health risks posed by climate change. This can include reporting on climate adaptation strategies, such as building more resilient healthcare systems. It can include improving sanitation and promoting sustainable agricultural practices. By providing accurate and actionable information, journalists have the opportunity to empower Caribbean communities to not only understand the risks, but also to take more informed or proactive steps to safeguarding their health and their well-being, right? And I'm gonna close on the last opportunity that I wanna mention, and that is the power to shape policy through investigative journalism, right? There's a significant potential here for journalists to really influence policy and drive change through investigative journalism, stories that uncover hidden truths, right? Stories that expose corruption, stories that hold powerful interests to account. These can really play a crucial role in shaping government responses to climate and health crisis. They can also demand accountability and transparency. And journalists can push for stronger regulations, more funding for climate adaptation and public health infrastructure, and just a greater political will to address climate and health, the climate and health nexus, the nexus, right? So these are some of the challenges, these are some of the opportunities. Before I was not checking my time, but before I close, I just want to mention some of the stories that our journalists have been focusing on with regards to climate and health. We have had recently in our climate justice fellowship, for instance, we had a journalist from the Bahamas who she did an entirely investigative piece, a 3-part piece that looked at the impacts of climate on mental health. And she looked at how Hurricane Dorian is still to this day impacting mental health of people in the Bahamas. We have another journalist who did a couple stories looking at the impact on children in classrooms, right? The heat and the way it impacts how their performance. We looked at we had another journalist that looked at the impact of how the changing climate or the increased temperatures, it's impacting just being a child, right? And being able to go outside during the vacation period. We have more children staying inside, and because you can't go out in the hot sun, right? And how does that impact your child's mental health? It impacts their social health. It impacts their overall well-being, you know, and so that was another story that was really interesting. And there's so many different stories that can come out of the nexus of climate and health. And understanding these challenges and these opportunities through the lens of a journalist, I think is really important for to bridge that gap. All right, so I'm going to close there and say thank you so much, because the Caribbean, it really is at a critical juncture, and the role of journalism, the role of the technical experts understanding what we need as journalists, as media, it has never been more crucial, and we must really continue to rise to the occasion, report with integrity, courage, and creativity, and just get those Caribbean narratives out there as much as possible. So thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about this.
Thank you very, very much for that, Dizzanne. You know, Climate Tracker continues to do excellent work. You mentioned it more than once in your presentation, and Faine did in hers, which has this problem with data. At the Media Institute of the Caribbean, for example, we did an 18-month project to track state expenditure in I think it was 8 Caribbean countries, state expenditure on pandemic measures, particularly when it related to money received by these governments from international agencies. What we had to do at the end was to pay a lot of money, because there are people who are doing this kind of aggregation outside of the region in order to get the data that we needed, and the dollars and cents. So sometimes you will find that it's not that the data don't exist, but it's to find it. And many times it comes at great cost. So the person who asked, I think it was Juan Carlos, was asking about the fact that, you know, sometimes there is this disconnect between the work of the journalist and the work of the scientist. I think that one of the ways that you can address that brick wall is to understand what the news agenda is all about and what journalists really need. In the vast majority of cases, we don't really mean wrong. We mean to get it right. And journalists feel very proud about getting their data and information right. Thanks a lot again for that, Dizzanne, and thanks, Faine, before. So I want to introduce Ashley Lashley now. Over to you, Ashley.
Thank you, Wesley. How is everyone feeling? Good evening, everyone. I hope you guys can see my screen, but I'm super excited to share the insights from my personal experience engaging with youth in the climate and health sector through the Hey campaign that I started 4 years ago. Funny enough, when I first started the Hey campaign, a lot of persons, including young persons, were still asking the question, how is climate change impacting on people's physical health? So there's still a big notion, or some persons rather not see how climate change has indirect and direct impacts on not only their physical health, but their mental health. So through my presentation today, we'll focus on the effective strategies for engaging young people on social media. We'll be looking at the pros and cons of different approaches and consider how these lessons can really support health practitioners in fostering that culture of climate and health awareness amongst young people. So I'm ready to dive into how social media can really inspire positive and actionable change. So like I mentioned, I started the Hey campaign 4 years ago as a young person from Barbados. And so far, we've been able to bring over 500 young persons from Asia, Latin America, Africa, the Caribbean, and North America together to really be advocates for climate and health. And across the last 4 years have been a challenge, but it's been somewhat a testing platform to see what works for youth engagement on multiple social media platforms and what doesn't. So we've tried to have a strong presence on different social media platforms like Instagram, TikTok. We even began to use LinkedIn and Facebook. And TikTok has been very, 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 very new to how we communicate our messaging. But with different techniques that we've adopted over the last 4 years, we've been able to achieve over 500,000 impressions across different levels of engagement through different forms of interactive content. But here it says the power of youth engagement on social media. And statistics on youth engagement with social media have really shown that 90% of young people between the ages of 13 to 24 are active on social media. I know at a very young age, even across my different school tours, I see children as young as 6 years old utilizing different social media and talking about the different trends that they have been posting. But also, it states that 70% reported that social media influences their views on environmental issues. And these findings came from the Pew Research Center. And according to them, they also indicated that social media significantly shapes how young people perceive climate change and other social issues. So for Gen Zs and millennials in particular, they're very, very, very active in climate-related online discussions and activism. We've been seeing that more young people are understanding the impact of the climate crisis and want to advocate not only for more environmental and climate-friendly policies, but want to ensure that every individual knows their role in playing for protecting the environment. But then when we're looking at the teens, nearly all teens report that they are on some form of social media, with platforms like Instagram and even Snapchat being the most popular amongst the 13 to 24 age range. And for me, this really highlights the powerful role that social media plays, or that social media can play rather, in informing and influencing young users' opinions on environmental and social causes. But although my presentation is focused on social media can be deemed as an asset for spreading awareness to a young population, but sometimes you also have to take that direct approach through different campaigns on schools, etc., to really understand what drives young people into accessing multiple content across the varying social media platforms. So here I would be highlighting some successes that I've found in social media and what works, and some effective strategies that can be backed them up by specific examples and metrics. So for us through the Hey campaign, what we've recognized is that interactive content like polls, Q&A, and story challenges really drive our engagement across our different social media platforms. But these are not done on the feed posts, but these are done in what we call our story posts. So from there, we can ask young people, do you think climate change and health are interconnected? Have your mental health be impacted by some form of climate change? We can ask them a wide plethora of questions and topics. And that also helps us generate different data and different reports as well, so that we can see how our audience is thinking. But research also shows that posts with interactive features actually have a 50% higher engagement rate. And as I mentioned, even within our Hey campaign, what we've seen firsthand is we have something called What's Your Green Action? And it's basically an Instagram story challenge that is encouraging followers to share small actions that they're taking for the environment. And it was really incredible when we first saw it, that we saw hundreds of young people joined in, sharing their actions and tagging friends. But also we did a series on social media where we asked young persons to simply write a climate and health quote on a placard and tag 3 friends to also share the message. And with that campaign, we saw hundreds of young people globally also participating. So the type of content that really includes like encouraging persons not only to share their actions, but also to tag friends, really boost the visibility, but help young people and people in general feel like they're part of a larger community effort. And another successful approach, and the previous speakers also spoke to it, is relatable storytelling. Young people or people in general will resonate with stories from people just like them, those navigating similar challenges and taking meaningful action. And recently we started a climate pulse series in partnership with the Pan American Health Organization and Revolutionaire, where we use storytelling as a form to really understand the issues and opinions of young people when it comes to climate and health. And through this, we've spotlighted different young activists from across the world, from diverse backgrounds, who were sharing their journeys and insights on climate and health. And for us, this series has really been a powerful form of engagement because one, it not only shows the real stories and real impact, but for us, it's fostering that sense of connection and motivation amongst users to actually take action for climate and health justice. But finally, collaborations with youth influencers and peers really add and amplify reach and credibility. Posts featuring young, known youth personalities can drive engagement higher between 20 to 30% because these influencers are trusted voices within their communities. For example, when again we collaborate with environmental influencers or local youth ambassadors, we see more comments, we see more shares, and we see more positive reactions. And these partnerships can really help to bring that attention to our cause in a way that feels authentic and approachable for young audiences. Right now, when it comes to social media, one thing that is trended across the varying TikTok platforms is that of different dance trends. So right now we're trying to find ways in which we can utilize dance on social media that can also tell the story of climate and health. So together with these different strategies, interactive content, relatable storytelling, and influential partnerships, it really allows us to connect deeply with a younger audience, making climate and health issues more accessible and actionable. But we just went into the successes in social media engagement and what works, in my opinion. But outside of that, there are challenges in climate and health action. And those challenges really look at how the challenges that we face when engaging youth on social media, particularly around misinformation and mental health. One concern that we have is that is the spread of misinformation. And around 60% of young people encounter misinformation on social media every week. I'm sure many of you see across different social media platforms, even for us, there's a caption comes up on different posts. This content is false or non-factual. But this presents a significant challenge as misinformation spreads much faster than factual content. And to address this, what we've done through the Hey campaign is that we've partnered with trusted organizations to provide a clear, concise, and factual information, helping to combat the spread of myths and ensure that youth are in with access and have access to accurate data. But one thing that really stifles my mind, that makes me kind of angry and annoyed at times, is meta policies on political content, which includes certain environmental topics. This actually have had limitations on the organic reach of posts discussing climate and health, if they touch on policy or activism. By categorizing some environmental issues as political content, Meta's guidelines have and will continue to restrict the visibility of what we would deem as our awareness posts, making it extremely challenging to reach broader audiences to critical issues. So to work around this, it's really effective to focus on community stories, personal actions. And right now, a lot of collaborations across Instagram is trending where you can tag more than one of your partners on your post. And also, this really gives a push towards those personal actions and the health benefits of climate initiatives without really delving into the climate and the policy discussions. For example, posts that emphasizes how climate actions improve health or showcase the individual efforts in communities may avoid being classified as political content. And this approach really helps to increase the reach and engagement of climate and health related messaging, even within Meta's constraints policies. Another issue is often information overload. With the constant stream of data online, many young people have been complaining of eco fatigue, a feeling of being overwhelmed by the sheer information. And this is why we emphasize keeping our messages simple and actionable. Rather than bombarding youth with complex data, we try to focus on providing them with clear steps they can take to make a difference, whether it's reducing their carbon footprint or supporting local environmental initiatives. We also try to translate different data and different policies on the environment and how it interconnects with health to ensure that that they understand the information in a very friendly manner. And we also need, what we've recognized is that we also need to address the perceived inaction that often leads to eco-anxiety amongst our young people. And when youth are constantly exposed with information about climate change, but see no concrete actions being taken in their countries or within their communities, it can lead to a feeling of helplessness. And this is why we make it a priority again to showcase the actions that can happen and that are happening within their communities by including real world examples and specific steps that they can take. We then turn their anxiety into action, empowering them to make a real difference. But there's so many different creative tips for social media engagement. And many of my past panelists would have spoken to sharing those stories. But one thing that I've noticed that have been trending a lot across multiple social media platforms is the usage of artificial intelligence. And some of you may have your own opinions on that, but currently a lot of AI usage, talking about the context of different countries and translating different media into different AI forms, that has been doing extremely well on different social media platforms, and it augurs well to have data that is coming from an accurate source. But also utilizing different hashtags is also something that trends, and your audience finds ways at reaching you a little faster. So we can do hashtag arithmetic. So everyone today can go on Instagram and type in arithmetic, and you may be able to see all of arithmetic's content. Or you can even type in the hashtag of we or hey, and that's a hashtag that we utilize across social media that our persons can reach us on at any time. But as I would have mentioned, TikTok is often utilized for those quick, catchy videos, and that said, an art is certainly something that continues to trend across our different social media platform. But Twitter is actually a great source for giving persons frequent updates and facts on information relating to climate and health. And I wanted to mention this case study because through the Hey campaign, we have our Hey ocean and beach cleanups that we do across the world. And we've been able to mobilize youth from different parts of their communities to take action. And through this, we've shared their stories through Instagram and Facebook Live, tagging participants and highlighting their contributions to improving our oceans and coastal lines. And this approach has showed us the real impact of local actions on global health. And it has shown us that it has actually led to a 40% increase in engagement with a notable spike in the follower interest after the live coverage in their specific countries. So some best practices in messaging and do's and don'ts. And finally, is here to show some practical tips. And do not make calls to action. Do make calls to action clear. Say join the environment. Here's how you can help to really inspire participation. We need to avoid using overly alarmistic language. It can feel sometimes paralyzing without providing an actionable solution. And it's important to encourage community sharing by creating a sense of belonging and avoid technical jargon and use relatable terms and concepts again to really make concepts easy to understand. So finally, through these strategies, I've seen firsthand how social media can really amplify youth engagement in climate and health by understanding what resonates, creating action-oriented visuals, relatable stories, interactive features, and through these mediums, you can use social media to inspire and empower youth towards positive health and environmental behaviors. So thank you, and I do hope you enjoyed my presentation.
That was great, Ashley. Thank you very, very much. Awesome, as somebody says there. Okay, now I want us to take this 30 seconds because we have an online poll. So just take 30 seconds and respond to that. And in the meantime, I'm going to go through the list of questions that arose throughout the 3 presentations.
Give it a couple more seconds. People are still responding.
Hey, Haley, maybe you can bring up the results for everyone to have a look. Can everyone see the result of the poll? Good. So we're seeing heavy emphasis on social media to promote climate and health action. That's pretty good. That's a reflection of the reality and where people are seeing social media channels. And that's followed by newspaper articles, letters to the editor, and news and television interviews and appearances. And those platforms are still very important, as Faine mentioned in her presentation. And I want to come back to you, Faine, because when we finish with this, and then using radio. So we're seeing that it's a declining number of people who are going to be using radio. So Faine, my question to you and the other panelists can chime in. There is this sort of interplay between traditional or legacy media, as they call it, and new and social media. How do you see that? How is that interplay working out as a public communicator yourself? How do you see that dynamic?
I think if you're not strategizing somewhere in the social media space, you're missing the mark overall. That's not to say, as we said, that there are not worthwhile demographics, vulnerable demographics that you should meet through more traditional media. But really and truly, the movers and shakers in society who are into this issue of climate change, who are open and receptive to it, are really young people. This is still very new for more mature audiences, but you find, many young people, in fact, they talk about that sort of gloom and doom syndrome that defines a lot of the generations under me. And that's because of how aware they are that the temperatures are getting hotter, not enough is being done. So it really does mean so much to them that if you're leaving them out as a very specific target, no matter who else you're hitting, you're really losing the ability to gain traction on the messaging that you're trying to hit home. So whether you choose to exclusively focus in the social media space, or my suggestion would be, straddle both. You're working with mainstream media because you want to get other demographics. You want to take advantage of other media, which allow for more complex issues to be discussed and ventilated, for you to get more nuanced messaging, to chime in more human and lived experiences through more than one anecdote. Whereas Ashley made the point, you've got to be clear and concise on social media, and that loses a lot of the flavor, the connection, the breadth in what you're trying to get across. So there are definitely points for both. And I would never just isolate it to mainstream media. If you're going to pick one, work in the social media space, but ideally try and think about how you can work through the various channels so that you capture everybody.
Thanks for that, Faine. Dizzanne, my own view is that the mainstream or legacy media still play a validating role. So there's quite a lot of stuff happening in the social media space. A lot of information, misinformation, disinformation, things are happening at a rapid rate. But when people need to make very serious decisions in their life, and they want to validate some of the things or to dismiss it, there is a tendency in Caribbean audiences, and this is my view, I'm asking Dizzanne if you agree with this, that mainstream media still play this kind of validating or confirming role. Okay, all the confusion is there, but did the television newscast confirm it? Did the newspaper confirm it this morning? How do you see that, Dizzanne? Ashley, I'm coming to you.
Yes, I agree with you on that, Wesley, because at the end of the day, as Faine mentioned as well, social media is very important. It's very important to reach specific audiences and the younger audiences. However, at the end of the day, I think we are still quite traditional in the Caribbean, in that, if you want to do your research, if you want to know what's happening outside of the social media noise, you are going to say, okay, I'm gonna read it, I'm gonna look for the newspaper, I'm gonna, maybe today I should, or there's something happening, I wanna see what the report is in the newspaper, I wanna sit down and look at the primetime news, I do think that something that's interesting about young Caribbean people is that we do exist in that space at the same time. We do exist in the space of, okay, I'm scrolling, but if there's something that catches my interest, I am going to sit down and look at the news. You know, I am going to sit down and see, I'm going to see what Ryan Beachu has to say about this. You know, I'm going to see what the CNC3 has to say about this. And I'm just speaking about Trinidad and Tobago popular news, but we do exist in that space. We do straddle that space of both media. So I definitely think, as Faine mentioned as well, being able to strategize in a way where you're not just focused on the social media content, but you're able to splay it out in a way where the content, it fits for social media. You can fit it for the audience of, you know, and then the thing about it is that even within social media, it's not just all young people. You know, it's I'm gonna do the strategy for Facebook where, you know, my auntie who is in Gen X, you know, can understand. I'm gonna do it for TikTok where my 13-year-old cousin can understand, you know. So even understanding just the different demographics on social media is important. But yes, just to answer your question in a simple way, I do think that the Caribbean young people specifically straddle both spaces. And it is important to understand the sub-audience, the target audience, the sub-audiences, and just how to reach them. And as Faine mentioned as well, the media that you want to use to share your message is very important.
Thanks, Dizzanne. Ashley, your take on it, and while you're there, also respond to another question we have, and you mentioned it in your presentation, about storytelling in such a way that creates a climate of anxiety and fear. And you address it, but it's there in one of the questions, so maybe you can take that as well.
Okay. I both agree with Faine and Dizzanne on what they would have mentioned. And what I've recognized leading an NGO is that the first thing is that I need to know who my audience is. And my key audience is young people. But secondly, my other audience is potential donors or persons within the climate and health space that I also want to tap into. So while I utilize social media to break down the information to my youth audience, which is my core audience, I still need to do multiple email blasts. I still need to make sure that journalists and media are present at different initiatives and events, and also to have conversations with them to see how best we can also interview different young people who are participating in the initiatives, to also allow them to share their stories, to also have a platform on social media. One thing that I've recognized when it comes to mainstream media is if you interview a young person, of course, with parental consent, you can ensure that those parents and that overall community will allow their family and friends to go to mainstream media to either see their child or ward on television or listening to them on radio. So as Dizzanne would have mentioned, you need to know your audiences. And when it comes to the older generation, I'm sorry to the older generation who's present, but you also need to understand that there are audience within themselves. We've recognized that across the Caribbean. Right now, a lot of the things that our political leaders are saying are being translated into memes that are relatable to a lot of young people. So that is something also that some organizations have tapped into, how they can utilize a meme for what a political figurehead have said to make it relatable to the messaging that they have been pushing thus far.
Well said, Ashley. And in the process, you sort of addressed an issue that was raised in another question, and which was posted earlier on. I think it was Juan Carlos who was wondering how come the journalists weren't paying attention to the outcome of a webinar on climate change. And his point was, well, the journalists didn't seem to care. Maybe it is a question of the presentation of the material and the extent to which the original scientific finding or outcomes don't even closely resemble what the final product is in either social media or mainstream media. So Dizzanne, using that as a segue to a question that was directed at you, and it was a nice question to receive from a scientist. how do scientists here associate more as easily with Climate Tracker? How do they get involved? How do they become sources, authoritative sources? Because we have in the room this evening, some fine regional experts in these areas. How do they get involved?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think definitely you can definitely reach out to me, first of all. But how we would love to engage with you is through our training sessions. We do have training sessions for a lot of different topics as it relates to climate, because we understand just how pervasive climate change is, right? So whether your area of expertise is in medical science, whether it's in climate science, we have all of that involved or included in our training sessions. So you can reach out to me for sure. We have a community of journalists across the region that we're hungry and thirsty for knowledge, for your knowledge and your understanding and your experiences, and they really want to be able to translate that in a way that people can understand. So definitely you can reach out to us at Climate Tracker. We're in the process right now of putting together cycle 5 of our Climate Justice Fellowship. And even if we have a conversation, I could then, if I'm able to have conversations with you directly, I can then work that into our programming and our curricula accordingly. So it'll be great. I'd love to have conversations with any one of you guys at any point in time.
Thanks for that, Dizzanne. Okay, now the final question, and is the multi-trillion-dollar question, and it's going to Faine. And anybody else want to chime in, you can. In your presentation, you spoke about balance, and somebody raised the multi-trillion-dollar question: is how do you apply this notion of balance when you have a situation where 99% of the scientists in the world are saying, have established the anthropogenic link between what's happening in climate and human behavior and so on, and a 1% or less than that. How do you apply this notion of balance there?
So one of the things that I think I had mentioned was that media is very fragmented in not just the number of different platforms you can use, but also this lean or the slant that they take in what they validate and what they allow, airtime to, and what they allow column inches to explore. And some of that is the climate denial, right? There are media outlets that thrive on feeding into that because that's the audience that they attract, and that's the way that their audience feels. When we're talking about balance in the climate crisis conversation, an easy way around that is to really not talk about the climate crisis as a label. We're talking about lived experiences, and that can cut right down the middle and reach people regardless of where they fall around the climate science debate. One of the good things about a data deficit in the Caribbean, although we and global bodies like the UN acknowledge very stridently that the Caribbean has its unique vulnerabilities, as Dizzanne pointed out, the measurement of how climate change is affecting us in, coastline erosion data, warming temperatures data, we just don't have it. But there's a benefit there, which is that people are living and seeing and experiencing this in all its many facets, from the way food supplies get affected because of flooding to the way that respiratory illness cases might tick up, in hot spells and dry spells, the concerns about the classroom and if my child is going to sweat their life away because there's no fan. So there are lived experiences that sort of make up for that data, and actually to a Caribbean audience may be a little bit more convincing because they respect when Tanti and Nenen and Grandma say, when I was a little girl, the sea used to be out there, and look at all these trees that have now gotten washed away and knocked down and fallen over because the sea is now so much closer to my house. And we, whether it's what you survived in Hurricane Beryl or, really unusually dry seasons, it's something that we're living, and we're a little bit more open to this idea that that's not the regular thing that used to obtain 50 years ago. So the balance for me is remove the label, cut straight to the lived experiences and the bread and butter issues. And you don't have to straddle that imperative of how can I get another voice inside of this, which is likely a voice that is denying lived experiences, denying the science, the data, and the common sense.
Thank you very much for that, Faine. That's an excellent way for us to wrap this evening. Just want to remind you of those links there. You'll see Haley Campbell has placed 2 links there. If you want to receive a recording of this session, take note of that link. You can cut and paste it, keep it in your browser if you're using a browser. The CME credit link is there as well. I put a link to the CIJN Caribbean Investigative Journalism Network, where we have done some of this work using multimedia platforms. And yes, all that's left for me now is a thank you very much, panelists. That was just amazing, very interesting. 3 people coming from marginally different perspectives and backgrounds, professional backgrounds, and I thought it was really wholesome and fulfilling. Thank you very, very much. All the best.
Thanks so much. Good night, everyone.
Okay, good night.
Night,
Bye-bye.
everyone.